Here is another example of the use of E-ARK. I'm from the Publications Office, and I will explain how we reconcile two different standards, the E-ARK and the FRBR standards. Next slide. Briefly, the outline. After presenting who we are, I will go more in detail into the modeling of the publications in our archive. I will tell some words about the limits of this model and conclude the speech. Next slide. So first, who are we? Next. So the Publications Office is an interinstitutional body of the European Union. So we are at the service of all the other EU institutions, bodies and agencies, and we publish what those institutions author. So when they want to make publications, we are the publishing house of the EU. Our missions rely on 4 pillars. First, we produce the publications, so we get their manuscripts and we publish them. The second is the access. We give access to the citizens to the publications that have been produced. And for this, we have a whole set of websites on which we put all the publications. You see the websites on the right side of the slide. Those websites cover many different domains. There is the legal domains, EURLEX, where we publish the official journal of the EU. We publish also all the public procurement notices on EU tenders, on TED. We publish also general publications on books, leaflets, posters, and so on the EU publications website. There is also another website about the results of the research funded by the EU on the CODIS website. And there is also another type of websites where we publish data sets. For example, the EU Who's Who with the list of all the officials of the institutions, but also we are the portal, the European portal, gathering the governmental data from the member states and from the institutions on Data Europa EU. And we publish also data sets that we produce at the Publications Office in order to create those websites with the EU vocabularies. And last but not least, we give access also to the capture of all those websites, not only ours, but also the ones of the institutions on the EU Web Archive website. So this fills in also the third mission, which is the reuse, because we structure the data. And the last behind the scene, the last mission is the long-term preservation, about which I will explain what we do. So next slide. A word about our digital preservation workflow, because it's a bit special. So Publications Office plays the role of like a national archive, but at the level of the EU institution, besides being the editor of the EU institutions. So in EUDOR, our long-term preservation repository, we feed it with publications, so documents for which we are sure they have been published. So technically, we fetch those documents from the dissemination repository, which is a bit special because in other archives, it's sometimes not organized like that. Next slide. So let's have a look at the modeling of our collections. Next slide. So I said that on the one hand, we have our long-term preservation repository that that structures the data on the E-ARK specifications. But on the other hand, the dissemination repository has all the libraries, so it sticks to the FRBR, the functional requirements for bibliographic records, the FRBR standard, which is very common in the library world. So how do we reconcile both? Next slide. So first, the FRBR standard. So it's a standard that has been established by IFLA, the International Association for Libraries. And it relies on 4 different levels. So for each intellectual or artistic endeavor, there is the level work, which is an abstract entity. For example, the brochure, the ABC of EU law. The work is realized through various expressions. So in this case, those are the language versions, because we publish this title and exactly the same content with the same text, same images and so on in 24 linguistic versions. So those are the expressions. Each expression, each language version is embodied in various manifestations, because for each we can have the paper brochure, but also the PDF file or the HTML file. And each manifestation is exemplified in various items, because the example shows that those are the various copies, paper copies of the paper copy. Next slide. So if we go to the E-ARK standard, and more specifically the information package, the IP, you see on the left side the metadata domain, I would say, and on the right side more the files and the representations. So there is the METS packet, the METS XML that gives an overview of the structure of the package, with the list of all the files that are inside the package. There is another group for the metadata, the descriptive preservation and other metadata. And more important, the representation group with the various, various representations, the various formats, and within the data with the list of all the files themselves, corresponding to the same intellectual entity that is grouped in this information package. Next slide. So if we compare both, we see that the FRBR has 4 levels, whereas the E-ARK has, if we look not at the metadata, but more at the files, there are 3 levels. So if we begin by the bottom, which is the most concrete and the most easy to compare, the FRBR item corresponds to the data files. One level above, the manifestation in the FRBR, so the different formats, correspond to the various representations in the E-ARK model. A level above, there are the expressions, so the different language versions, and the work correspond to the AIP. So we have 4 levels at the FRBR side and 3 levels in the E-ARK. So how do we manage to fit the data into this model? Next slide. So in fact, we spread the work and the expression on 2 different types of information package. We have two types. The information package at the work level, which contains the metadata of the work, but only without any data file, and with all the metadata, of course, that go together. And we have, besides, 1 information package per expression, with inside the representations and the data files. And there is a link between both, so that logically each expression links to the work, so that we can know that they belong, they go together. Next slide. So this is reflected in the figures, in the statistics. In our long-term preservation system, which is called UDOR, we have 3.4 million publications, which represent 34.5 million language versions. You see that there is an average of 10 language versions per publication. In fact, the legal documents have 24 languages, but in the general publications, there are sometimes less, 2 or 3, or sometimes only 1 language. So that's why there is this difference. Then at the level of the representations, we have 83 million and 166 million content files. Content files, I don't count all the metadata files, the events, and so on. So just the content files relating to the publications. So what are the limits of this model? So I said that in our case, the legal texts are published in 24 languages, which means that for each work, we have in fact 25 AIPs in our archive, which means that all the events that happen on those packages are multiplied by 25, which is quite an overhead. And it takes also some processing time. So this is the cost to be completely compatible with our dissemination repository. So that's why, next slide. So that's why we try to mitigate it and to apply slightly different rules for other types of collections. For example, for the procurement notices that are, it's a volume that is, we have 700,000 new notices per year, so it's huge. So that's why for those we modeled the AIPs in another way. So we keep the FRBR, but there we created only one single multilingual expression per work, so that all the data files in all the languages are put in the same AIP. So the conclusion, the mapping between the FRBR with the 4 levels and the E-ARK with its 3 levels is perfectly possible, but it should be adapted in function of the volume and the type of the documents. So that's our lesson that we learned in this journey. So thank you for your attention.